It's 2 o'clock, time to call the workshop to order. This one deals with proposed new towns. Stan, you want to give us a word of praise here, and then the Pledge of Allegiance will be by Tom Lowther.
Let's pray. Father God, this afternoon we give you thanks for the minds and the freedom that you've given us, and we thank you for those. We recognize this afternoon that those are not enough if the results aren't good and aren't in accordance with your will. So we ask your blessing upon the results, and we ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen. If you please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Chairman's leadership.
Item 4, Community Development. Proposed new town policies. Proposed revisions to existing comprehensive plan new town policies that allow development of new towns outside of the urban service area under certain conditions. Robert, Stan?
Good afternoon. For the record, Stan Bowling, Planning Director. This workshop is on new town policies that are already in the comprehensive plan and have been in the comprehensive plan since 1991, and what's proposed are revisions. I want to address a few topics right off the bat. One is why now? Why are we here? What's the timing with the new town policies? And although we are not in a rush to make changes to the new town policies, what we have on the books right now has generated concerns from the Board of County Commissioners back last May at the conclusion of the visioning process and some comprehensive plan amendments that were looked at that time. So what we have right now are policies on the books that have been on the books for quite a number of years that the board has concerns about. So we know that changes are needed. Also, it's another indication that some changes are needed is that although it's been on the books for a number of years, it appears that some of the elements, the requirements right now, may not be workable. And so to come up with a viable new town option or policy, some changes are needed. The reason this is coming forward now is a result of staff research since last May, looking at the issues that the board raised last May. And because comprehensive plan amendments are needed to change these policies, staff put this in the January window amendments. And currently this is moving along with the other amendments, which need to move together as a package. And so right now, the new town policies and proposed revisions are in that group of amendments. So one of the issues for the board to address at the workshop this afternoon is whether or not it wants staff to continue with that timing, or if there are any other reasons to decouple it from the group of amendments that's going through now. We can do so, and that's some of the direction that staff is looking to the board for. If this is delayed, and it goes, for instance, in the next set of amendments, say in July, then just keep in mind the time frames for adopting comprehensive plan policies is pretty long term. It would be more than a year from now if it were delayed until July. And so each 6-month window that you delay it, it's another 6 months beyond that. One other item that I wanted to address up front, and if we could have the lights, I'll just have 2 items for the camera here this afternoon. One is in our discussions with various interested parties. One item that I did want to bring up is the term new town. You may recall, I guess in years past, this group of comprehensive plan policies were called mixed use. We decided to change the name a few years ago to new town to give it give people a better idea of what it actually is. Well, there may be some misunderstanding of what new town entails. In reality, when we're talking about a new town outside the urban service area, and that's the situation that we're talking about with this set of policies, it's not just the area of the project that people consider a town, where you have town type of development. The project includes a green belt or some of the countryside around that town. So when we're talking new town, we are talking about village or town development and green area around it. We're talking about the whole package with that project. And I want to just illustrate, again, this is not a new town, but this is on the North Merritt Island. This is the layout of Windsor. And the reason I want to put it up on the screen is when we are talking new town, the way it's structured in the comprehensive plan, this type of physical layout that you see at Windsor is the type that we're talking about, and that is a core area, and Windsor has its own village off of, here's A1A, the main entrance. They have their highest density and their most intensively developed area in a core with a layout, a modified grid and that sort of thing, and a mixture of uses within this core area. And then they have a green belt. In this particular case, it's polo fields and paddocks and a golf course, and then there are larger, very low density estate lots as well along the edge. But those two elements are what we're talking about in a new town, a more developed core, and the shape doesn't matter so much, but just a more developed core where most of the density is, and where there's a mixture of uses and a lot of different types of design requirements, and then there is a large greenbelt area. So when we talk about new town, we're talking about a core area, or could be multiple cores, and associated green space and countryside around it in the project. It's not just the developed area that we're talking about. The context of what we're talking about with the new town policies is really essentially how to plan most of the land area in Indian River County. And just by way of example, this is our future land use map for the entire county, and the municipalities represented in the gray areas here. But the urban service area, including the municipalities, is essentially covers about 1/4 of the county. It's at the eastern edge of the county, and it's 1/4. So most of the land uses that and projects that have been the subject of a lot of the debate have been projects inside the urban service area. What the new towns really focuses in on is the western 3/4 of the county, and that's really divided up into, again, these are areas outside the urban service area, most dense on the eastern edge of that, and then less density as you move west. The AG1 areas here in blue, east of I-95, and some of those are also around Fellsmere, 1 unit per 5 acres. Then the green areas here in the middle, 1 unit per 10 acres. Then all the blue area is conservation under public ownership for stormwater management conservation purposes, including Blue Cypress Lake. That takes up quite a bit of the western county. And then farthest to the west of Blue Cypress Lake, and essentially the marsh area, is 1 unit per 20 acres. So the majority of the county is actually outside the urban service area, and what is important in terms of new towns is that is one option for developing part of that area and addressing some of the land use issues that are in part of that area. Now, as we look at the western 3/4 of the county, the AG1 and the AG2 areas are, the majority of those lands are in citrus. There are ranchettes, there are 5, 10, 20 acre residential parcels there. There are some pasture lands, some grazing lands, but the majority of that land, if you look at it in total, has been citrus in the past. And so what happens to the citrus industry and the degree of citrus production and acreage in citrus in these areas is really the middle half of the county, in a sense, is going to have a big impact. And what happens to that acreage and how quickly it might decline in terms of the number of citrus acres is a huge factor. Back in May of 2005, when the board looked at the new town policies, one of the issues that came up and the board, I think, responded to was recognizing there is a threat to citrus, and it seems like that threat has only increased since last May in terms of the probability that significant decreases in citrus acreage will occur over a certain number of years. And so we have a transition that's going to happen out there on the ground in a large part of the county, especially in kind of that middle area of the county. This area that's C1 that's in the blue, a lot of that has been acquired well, it's all acquired by public agencies. There may still be more of that to come, but in essence, in terms of the vast area that it now covers, probably the percentages aren't going to change that much. And then there is the AG3 area out here on the western end of the county, and much less of that is in citrus. A lot of that is in rangeland and pasture land, and is in wild and conservation, or areas that could be good candidates for conservation, have environmentally important features out there.
Stan, does that show the 4,000 acres that the St. John's bought from Felsmer Farm?
No, it does not. Those changes have not been reflected on, no comprehensive plan amendments have yet come through for that. But so there is more that's been added by St. John's than what this map shows. As we have put in the packet for this particular item, there are several options for developing or using the land in that western three-quarters of the county. And one of them is agriculture, and there's a whole range of agricultural uses that can occur. We believe that changes to the acreage and citrus could be significant in the coming years. There could be expansion in the conservation or stormwater areas, and Commissioner Davis just mentioned a recent addition to that. There are and will continue to be ranchettes, 5 to 20 acre ranchettes, depending on where it's located. We have subdivisions that are allowed out in those areas, and affidavits of exemption, which are essentially smaller size developments, but still large lots. Unpaved roads are allowed, but that they do have to have stabilized road access in affidavits of exemption. There are also agricultural PDs that are allowed in that area, and we've just had a few of those come through, not many. One on the west side of 66th Avenue, we went past the site on our tour last summer. There are some advantages to that. We tend to see those mostly on the edges of the urban service area. Also on the edges of the urban service area, but outside the urban service area, we also allow traditional neighborhood developments like Point West, which has property inside and outside the urban service area. And Liberty Park is a proposal in the North County that will eventually be coming through the review process at the edge. Again, allows some development outside the urban service area. And the other option to develop outside the urban service area is the new towns. Now, there are some, and we've identified these for lack of a better term, development threats outside the urban service area. In terms of being able to plan how much development and what type of development is going to occur, one is that the urban service area could be expanded. And certainly this current board has stated many times in all these discussions, the urban service area boundary will not change, especially for residential development. But it is a possibility looking out long-term into the future. That's one alternative for changing the landscape out there, or that could be some other option. There's also the option, and this has been discussed as well in these types of settings, that municipalities, Fellsmere, Sebastian, for instance, in the North County, could annex property that's currently outside the urban service area, and thereby, essentially with their own planning, make those urban-type development or suburban densities. That's another possibility. We've also seen legislation at the state level, possibly an ag enclave bill, depending on how it's written and if one gets passed, that could preempt or restrict some of the local control. So those are some of the possibilities that are out there that are kind of difficult to plan for. But we have to recognize that's part of the equation. Those are possibilities in the outlying area, and perhaps having a new town option is an alternative that could be a good alternative to some of those possibilities, as well as the ranchettes and having abandoned citrus land out there. There are some benefits that staff has identified, 3 basic ones for new towns. One is that through the new town policies that come about, actually having greenbelt areas and specific areas permanently green space, having all the development rights, future development rights taken from those lands so they can be used only for green type of uses. It could be agricultural, could be conservation, It could be stormwater management. There could be a number of areas of other uses like recreation with some restrictions on it to be managed and to long-term have green space. One of the other possible advantages of having new towns, and again, we'd be talking about outside the urban service area, and I'll just point to this one large AG2 area out west of I-95. If you had a new town out here, it could become kind of a rural village or node for all the other, ranchette and ag uses that occur out there, and it could become an activity center. That could be an advantage to people who work and farm and live in that area that aren't actually part of the Newtown project, but they could have commercial and institution and business opportunities. And if they have that type of arrangement out in the rural area, there may be some trips that they would not have to make, then come all the way back in to town and have long trips into the existing urban service area and move around. It won't eliminate all trips by any stretch, but it could add some conveniences and keep some of what happens out here from coming in and out of the urban service area essentially all the time. One of the other advantages, we get a little bit further out as I tell you what these benefits are, but one is, and this comes up in a lot of the discussions that we have in envisioning, we want to maintain a small town atmosphere, a small town sense of community. And really, if you want to direct new growth into a pattern and an arrangement that fosters small town atmosphere, creating a new town, small town, is one way to do that. Now, a town is more than just an arrangement, and it takes years for things to happen. But actually directing some of the new growth into, intentionally into that type of setting may have some advantages to keeping, creating another small town atmosphere out in a rural area and not expanding the urban service area, for instance. I want to go over one other aspect of these policies. That's important to realize. These are policies that go into the comprehensive plan, so we're setting out general parameters. Any type of new town project that were to be proposed and come through has a lot of hoops to jump through. The size development we're talking about would be a development of regional impact, which means there would be regional planning council review as well as local review. It also would require a comprehensive plan land use designation change for the project area itself and a plan development PD rezoning that goes with that. So there are a lot of controls of details that could come out with a specific project, and a lot of discretion on the county's part through that process, and there would be a lot of review. It would be a long review process. Other than that, I want to point out something else that's probably pretty obvious. It's difficult to develop new towns, and if you look at the concept itself, that you have to have a mix of uses, this is not a glorified or de facto suburban residential development the way the policies are structured. A residential developer could not go out and do this in the traditional sense. This requires a mix of uses. It would probably require some non-residential anchors. It would probably require different parties that would be involved in managing different green areas within a new town project area, because you have a mixture of uses going on. You could have a lot of parties involved in actually doing parts of the whole new town project. And there aren't a lot of examples to point to in terms of recent new towns. It's a special type of allowance, but it requires a special type of expertise. So I did want to mention that. Now, back to the policies themselves. Again, this sets up comprehensive plan policies, general parameters, and there's several balancing acts that staff tried to go through in proposing some revisions. One was, of course, to address what the board brought up back last May. One of the issues is a numbers issue, and it's looking at, right now, our current land use, our new town policy allows a density of up to 1 unit per acre for the new town area. Well, theoretically, if you had a new town out here and you basically had a new town that covered all of those areas that are out there now, you would have a significant number of potential units, on the order of 160,000 units, potentially. Again, it's hypothetical. And so one of the provisions that staff looked at was to set a cap on the total number of units or the total potential density bonuses that someone could get. At the same time, to make this work or make this workable, make it viable, you have to have enough incentives for someone to do this. And remember the other, staff was looking at one of the other options that's kind of the low-hanging fruit in this residential construction boom environment is ranchettes. How profitable is it for someone just to do the 5 and the 10 acre lots, sell those off without a lot of infrastructure going into it, versus the long-term commitment of doing a new town? So at the same time that we were cognizant of trying to address the concern of total number of units, density bonuses and all that, we were cognizant that we had to have enough incentive, and whatever winds up coming out of the new town policy needs to have enough incentive for someone to actually attempt it and to do it. So there's certainly a balancing act there. There are other items and other details that different groups are interested in. In these policies, do you require more conservation to be part of the proposal? Do you require a certain amount of farming activity or sustainable ag? There's a lot of benefits that can come out of a new town project. And so one of the balancing acts is you put a lot of specificity in the policies about those things, or do you let those come with the opportunity of a specific project? That probably more so on this type of development than other types of policies and LDRs that we look at, because these are rare. New towns are rare, and I think that the number of opportunities for actually doing a new town project will be few, just by the nature of what it is. I want to just summarize quickly, and this is in the backup, the 8 principal changes to the current policies that are on the books, and then we'd be glad to answer questions and certainly, of course, receive the board's direction on timing and substance of any of these. The first, and this is kind of going in order through the ordinance, or not the ordinance, the proposed new town policies, and I do apologize. In staff's report under attachments, we reference a draft that's 223. Everywhere else, it's 222. So I'm looking at the 222 draft. That's what's circulated for the workshop and is in your packet. The first item that staff proposes to change is to revise the minimum acreage requirements and to do away with separation distances between new towns that's in the policies now. We wanted to set a minimum acreage that would get us to around the potential of around 5,000 dwelling units with any new town. The research that we've been able to do indicates that that's kind of a critical mass, a minimum amount over time to make a new town work, and that's the reason why we've done that. The other is we figured that the separation distances was probably not a necessary policy to put in. It could constrain some otherwise good ideas, or over time someone could add into a new town if they meet all these other policies. We wouldn't want to lock everything in up front with and have a distance requirement get in the way of some good possibility. Another item that we proposed to change was to look at the AG1 and AG2 areas as the areas of locating the new town itself, and have some allowances for new towns in each of those areas, although it's unlikely that you would actually have a new town in each of those areas, and to not have the location of the new town out here west of Blue Cypress in the marsh. And there are a couple of reasons for that. The main reason being that the one benefit that I was speaking of earlier, having an area that can serve as kind of a rural village focus point, makes more sense in these areas that are a little bit closer into the urban service area. Also recognizing that these areas have already, over the decades since World War II, been converted to citrus, principally citrus, over the years. This land has already been changed. There's more land that is wild, so to speak, or more natural in this AG3 area. So we might want to concentrate on conservation more, lower densities more out there than actually doing a village. Another change that staff proposes is to allow what we call sending areas into the Newtown project area. And that is, if you have assemblies of land and people willing, you may have someone that's remote from the main core of a project that wants to strip all of the future development rights and just do farming into the future, generation after generation into the future, and get the benefit of transferring that density into what will actually be more of the core or main project area and keep that permanent green space. We thought that was an allowance that was worth putting into the policies. There are also, yes?
And you mind some questions?
Real quick.
Certainly.
On the A3 area, when you say that some of the more natural areas hadn't been disturbed by citrus or cultivated crops, to take that out of the Newtown concept and to do away with any potential density credits that may be there to set that side in perpetuity for conservation, isn't that kind of counterproductive to the whole policy?
Well, again, it's a balancing act between the numbers. Are we more concerned about the cap of numbers or the potential or not? And there are a couple ways you can go at this. If you decide that this is not, generally speaking, a good area to actually have a new town, but you want to give more incentive to send density from this area, you could allow the sending density to be more than the 1 to 20 out here.
Okay.
And that's certainly, again, these are some of the specific, and this is a good policy question. Do you want to really more incentivize conservation here and do that by the sending? Again, it's a balancing act. How much do they send, and how big do you want the new town to get out here? That'd certainly be one way to do it.
Okay.
If you were to conclude it's not a good area for a new town, but it's a good area to incentivize sending density in return for conservation, that would be a policy decision to make.
I want to jump in here too, Mr. Chairman. When we look at this, the overall effect is for the future down the road, and we have to be wise when we set these policies. And I really want to use the word fair and equitable, and we want to be fair to everyone. And to say that we could give more one way or more the other. We really need to balance this out and see what the equation will look like 20 years from now. If we do give more here and less there and more here. So if you could factor that in when you talk to us as to the real effects of water, the environment, population, maybe we could do a little more population one place to save more environment, but maybe we couldn't. And that really has to be wise. And I know y'all are touted as the best people in the state, pretty much, and we're pretty much ahead of the game here in planning this, and we don't have many opportunities. So for the record, I really would like to say that we don't need to jump into this, but we really do need to know the total ramifications of what we're doing, value-wise.
Hopefully we'll find that out today.
Well, I don't know if we can find it out in one sitting here, but.
As long as we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit, I've got several questions. And one, what you mentioned earlier about delaying this by 6 months, we've got room for another 150, 180,000 people in growth within the urban service line at this point in time. So I don't think that 6 months delay, if that occurs, is significant. Secondly, I'd like to see as some other alternatives to this rural PDs where you could go in with ranchettes and stuff and reduce and adjust lot sizes and have areas for transitional wildlife, et cetera, things we've talked about, environmental issues, greenways, water flow, drainage, et cetera, and ranchettes. And one of the reasons I like that as a PD because we'd have control over it. You could add more to it, and it'd be a much lower density overall as far as population goes for the rural area. The other thing that gives me concern about this is and Wesley mentioned it, we talked about it a few weeks ago, and also what Sandra said, and I think that we do need to be fair, and as I look at this and read this, it appears that to some degree, we're moving a lot of the density east of I-95, which, to put villages between 95 and the urban service line, seems more like urban sprawl than a village concept. And we're doing that at the expense of reducing densities in Ag 2 and Ag 3. In fact, eliminating Ag 3, transferring it. And I think, as another comment, that if you're going to do a new town and have enough acreage, then I think it ought to be further west of 95 and not east of 95. And then it truly is a new town rather than an expansion of urban services and sprawl that we've got right now. And then last, a question about with the 5,000 acres. I think you can do 24 or 4,200 acres, but 500 dwellings, I mean. What acreage are you looking at specifically in that, Stan? I was reading between 24 and 4,200 acres, something like that.
That's right. East of I-95, the minimum acres would be 2,400, and then west of I-95 would be 4,800, and that kind of parallels the density allowances there.
Well, if that's the case, you're looking at about 2,400 acres, 5,000 dwellings. You're looking at, what, half-acre lots, roughly? I'm doing this in my head, so I could be off here.
But you would actually have lots, most of the lots would be much smaller than that, because they would have to be in a...
But that doesn't seem like a lot of acreage for that amount of population. Because you're looking at going, 2 units per acre instead of 1 unit per acre, and then reducing it outside. The bonus transfer would be reduced down to a half of unit per acre instead of a whole unit per acre. And I don't know what the percentages would be, but it seems like there's a bigger percentage inside with a transfer of density. I know that the overall number can decrease, but we're increasing the number inside. And the other thing that concerns me is this approach, and particularly doing this inside 95, not only expansion, but it just seems that we're just maybe decade by decade, but we're just continuing to move things further west and grow. Population. I'm not so much opposed to development as I am how many people we're going to put in that development countywide. And one of the things we've talked about is, Bob and I have talked about urban sprawl, and we look at the big picture. Well, I kind of look at Indian River County, the big picture being the state of Florida. And we don't all have to be like the rest of the east coast of Florida with what's happened. So those are some of my concerns and some comments on it as far as we've gone so far.
Could I respond to that? Of course. My boss wants to speak first.
Let me go back and let me preempt Stan for just a second and answer Commissioner Weller's question. If you look at the minimum size in AG1, it's 2,400 acres. Some of the other requirements here at the outset say 50% of that off the top needs to be green area. So you're going to put all of the development in a maximum of 1,200 acres. So if you're talking about the density of the developed areas, you're talking essentially close to 5 units per acre.
How about the 25% that you can have that's non-contiguous to the property? Would that be part of the 50%? And if it is, then now you're down to 25% in the area instead of 50% because that can be set out.
Yeah, it's going to be open space, green area, some other place. It's going to achieve what we think is one of the objectives we want to achieve. And we go into this, and again, it's always good when you're doing policy analysis to decide what you want at the end. And I think we're looking at, to the extent we can, preserve agriculture. And it's a given, it won't necessarily be the kind of ag we have right now. But let me tell you in a minute a great opportunity that we have here with preserving ag. Another objective is maintaining the rural character, rural nature, so that it's green out there. Those are a couple of the objectives we're looking at. And keeping, say, 40-acre tracts as, as pasture, as grove, as some kind of agriculture, I think does achieve those objectives when you're transferring the density. Let me briefly tell you one opportunity we have here and we've found out recently. Stan and I met with a man named Dick Burgoon. I don't know any of you know him.
Berger?
No, well, I don't know whether he is, but he runs the watercress operation up at Fellsmere Farms, Fellsmere Joint Venture. He's on the property that St. John's just bought. And he's looking for, I think, about 10,000 acres, or how many, or
No, more like
somewhere.
more like 1,000 to 2,000.
yeah, a couple thousand acres he's looking at to relocate his watercress operation.
Not 10,000.
And he talked to us, and this is a perfect opportunity, because he's looking at maybe a 15, 20, or 30-year payout if he's going to invest all the infrastructure putting in there. And this is a type of agriculture that could be preserved out there. The development rights stripped off from this and put in an adjacent new town, and you have an opportunity to maintain some agricultural operation that's here now and may not be here if he can't find property. And he can get property at a rate that's feasible for him to continue ag because he's going to get paid for the development rights. That's one opportunity that's out there right now because he's looking for that land. And it's one of the reasons that it's one of the reasons that we had thought initially that it's a good opportunity to proceed with this. But let me.
Yeah, I'm just going to, what I'm hearing from Commissioner Wheeler is as adopted now, you think there may be too much density or incentive east of 95 for this, and actually not enough out here on the western edge. And again, and there are reasons for the different balances. There may actually be more pressure east of I-95 to do something totally different that would be less acceptable than a new town. But that is, and the other thing I wanted to ask about is in terms of using our ag PDs, which is already on the books. And I wasn't sure if we needed to go into that at some point in the future, or if you were thinking that to change our existing ag PD policies to allow a greater variety of lot sizes but more conservation easements or something. I wasn't quite sure what.
Yeah, that would be my approach. Ideally, would be to have the control over that and to have that flexibility to not eat up all the property in 5-acre or 10-acre ranchettes. You could have a lot of common area and growth area. But to go back to the other two, with the 25% of the 50%, that doesn't have to be contiguous. Now you're down to, if I'm interpreting this right, you're down to really 25% of the land being left green if you move 25% that's not contiguous to the property. And on top of that, you're counting many things in the green area and just not the area around. If they got tennis courts or swimming pools or walking parks inside and so on and so forth. And I don't know that I visualize, maybe I'm not visualizing this properly, but I kind of think of a village as everything being here and everything outside being rural if it was set far enough west. And not just, you started off with Windsor, and I realize that's kind of a small example, but it's golf course and horse trails and whatever they have there that's not really what you'd call
Natural.
agricultural.
Right.
I would like to chime in on the ag PD issue. I'd like to see some kind of a change there somehow. To have the ag subdivision or the affidavit of exemption subdivisions, you have to have the 200,000 square feet or the 4.6 acres. Then if you go to the ag PD route, then you've got to have 1-acre lots. You've got to have them clustered, and then the rest of it in conservation or open space or common area. And the differentiation between the product, if you have the opportunity to live in the country, the chances of you wanting to live on a 1-acre lot is slim. However, the opportunity to do something with a parcel of land other than an affidavit of exemption or a 200,000 square foot lot is very limiting. And I understand that it's probably staff's perspective that you really don't want either one of these, based on the fact that, and I hear it all day, with it being very common in the Fellsmere area, the services, my road's terrible, my electricity goes out and I want water, but I don't want to pay for it. I hear that all the time. So I understand your purpose behind it, but there are some situations where I believe we're trying to force something that the market doesn't want, and we might wind up with something that really we as a community don't find beneficial.
Well, I don't know if they're forcing it. They're hopefully giving us the options, so we'll make up our minds on it.
There's only two things you can do in 5-acre ranchettes, communities. One of them is the ag subdivision, or excuse me, I'll put that in with the ag affidavit of exemption or the ag PD.
Correct.
And it's either 1 acre lots that are clustered or 200,000 square foot, 4.6 acres.
Bob, can't you hook up to county services in an ag PD?
Yeah, in an ag PD, you can get water and sewer even if you're outside the urban service area.
But
The reason I ask, and Gary's, I think, and you all are talking about, but, you know, if you drive out 60, let's go 10 miles west of town, and I'm just putting in an ag PD, and I want sewer and water for my property. I can do that,
If you can afford it.
if I can afford it.
and if you think people would want to live on a 1 acre lot for the same price they're
That's right.
paying for a 5 acre parcel, which that is the rub.
Excuse me, we can make the lots in an ag PD less than an acre in size.
Right.
We have to have 80% of the ag PD in open space or green space or something, conservation, whatever. But we can actually cluster to the point where we even have multifamily in an ag PD.
That's
And-
going the wrong direction. I'm looking for a 2 and a 3 acre parcel of land, not smaller. I'm looking for some product differentiation between ag PD. Right, exactly. Something that's, but right now, the product differentiation out there is just, I mean, it's almost impossible to make a 2 acre lot.
All right, so what you want to do is you want to take the 1 acre or less restriction on an ag PD and allow maybe 2 or 3 acre clusters? Clustered
Do
into
some
2 or
kind of
3
a cluster,
acres?
but, I mean, yeah,
Or you could leave the rest for maybe horseback riding or ATV?
something along those lines, yes.
Well, okay, all
You know,
right.
what concerns me, though, is, because I know sprawl with planners is a dirty word. I don't think sprawl's always bad. And I think sometimes we eliminate sprawl, and we end up with crawl from the perspective of just higher densities, more population, and just gradually crawling and filling up our land. Where with ranchettes and what they call sprawl, or planners call sprawl, I think, and I agree with Wesley, and I think that we do need more, I know it's
Watch it,
spooky,
Wesley, watch
I
it.
may change my mind, I'm sorry.
but I do think we need more latitude, more flexibility when we look at ag PDs, and I'd like to see us look at some other possibilities that would tie in with, between the villages and between what we've got inside the urban service line. I don't know that
May I
even-
ask, may I ask Mr. Wheeler some questions on that?
Certainly.
Okay. And in ag PD, you're not looking at the 10-to-1 transfer of density, you're looking at a 1-to-1. And I
Right.
know that is
No,
something that...
No, I'm looking at an ag density, the way it is right now, 1 per
Yes,
5 or 1 per 10.
right. I mean, the transfer of one
Credit,
unit
one
per 5
density per-
acres.
per
right.
the density, yeah.
No increase in density. So if we took that ag PD and we allowed various sizes of lots, instead of restricting it to less than 1 acre, maybe allow 2 acre on the outside, 3 acre on the outside, or multifamily on the inside, would you also consider maybe a small neighborhood-type retail?
Wouldn't
area?
justify it on some, I mean, you'd have to have a large area, in my opinion.
Well, if you're talking, let's say, 1,000 acres.
And you, I mean, to get
I'm just
1,000
talk-
acres of 1 unit per 10 acres, that would still, yeah, I mean, a convenience store or something. I understand where you're going with that, but you'd really have to jump it up. It would have to be a,
Feed store.
yeah, feed store would go over well.
Probably a gas station at this point. But this is the concept that you're trying to follow? Is that what you're trying to establish on
No,
an
all I'm
APD
after is some
maybe?
flexibility for a 40-acre parcel somewhere between 200,000 square foot lot or a 1 acre or less cluster. And right now, we have no flexibility in our policy on that.
I kind of
I
see
think
it.
that would be easy to do.
On one hand, we're looking at a village, and on the other hand, we're looking, and I'd like a little more flexibility in between as to what we can do, and not just fill everything up in the urban service line or fill everything up with a village. I think, I live on a small lot now, but I like ranchette-style development that can be done properly. And you might have a lot of acreage where they have smaller lots, but they have maybe common pasture area or a lake for recreation, or just various things that they could do in a PD community and have paved roads and other things that would work well, be marketable, and would create less people.
Or even maybe a golf course.
I
Ann, were you
think that, Mr. Keating, do you not think that changing our ag PD rules might be, and not doing away with new towns, but changing our ag PDs might help?
Well, it depends what your objective is again. What this will do will actually make it easier for people to go out there. If that's your objective, this would help. If your objective is to try to preserve agriculture in one form or another, keep it going. If your objective is to try to keep natural areas, large areas, if your objective is to overall try to maintain that type of ambience out there, that you won't get with this.
I think you can mix them, and I'm obviously not a planner, but I think you can mix them. But also, along with clustering and villages, we're giving such increases in densities that we're creating a lot larger population, and which is going to be a big draw on what type of lifestyle we have in this community, and that's based on population, not so much the building. I mean, it's just crowding more people in, and so I'd like to preserve some green area and ag land, but I'd also like to do it by not increasing our densities by 10 and 20 times, our population by 10 and 20 times.
And I guess what staff is saying, though, and with the new town, the way to incentivize that is through the density issue. That
and the current Ag PD allows an alternative, allows smaller lots out there, but it still gets to that objective of keeping large contiguous areas in open space, keeping that rural feel, allowing for agriculture to continue. If you allow just general type of development out there, the kind that's really going to incentivize people going out there, then you are going to create the rural sprawl and make it easier and less expensive, I think, for people to go out there.
Okay. Stan, were you finished with your presentation?
Yes, sir.
So the boss says.
Okay.
It's always good to get direction on what's not the topic of the workshop. But at some point, moving on would be good, too. Thank you.
So we like about your flexible.
We can move on. Do you have one more question?
One more question.
Well, somebody must have any questions.
I did. Sorry about that.
Well, this is a workshop. Anybody have any comments? Or we'll go to the audience. Someone in the audience? Mr. Gross with the P&Z.
I have put most of my notes on paper just to save time, but I want to start off by saying that I am for the new town. And there are many advantages, and I think, Sandra, your questioning is a good one. And one of the answers to that is that not less than 5% of the new town, as outlined here, would be for the town public works, for the fire station, for the school, for any of those type things. While if we're spread out all over the county, we have a larger road maintenance program, and Jim Davis was saying that we hardly have enough money now to maintain the roads we have, and we certainly don't have the population. While on the other hand, if we can group this, we're not going to have that as extensive of a road. We'll have a different kind of a road, and we'll have a better less expense maintenance program in trying to maintain that. So your question, I think, is a good one to think about. What is the overall advantages? And I see considerably right here with the new town concept. But getting to my notes in order to save, and likewise, anyone can jump in, but not necessarily, because these are my comments, of which I have given a copy to the planning and zoning. If they're worthwhile, they can take care of them. If not, then we just put them in the wastebasket. But I do concur that the government does not exist to ensure financial success of private business operations. But at the same time, I strongly believe in a partnership between government and private businesses, that government should establish reasonable criteria that will permit private business to profitably participate. Some of the proposed policies are too restrictive. Requiring a street network of a grid or a modified grid ignores the present-day trend in PD subdivisions, which in most instances, streets are undulating rather than in a straight line. Limiting the number of blocks where the perimeter of a block exceeds 1,800 feet, again revealing recent PDs, the public apparently desires to have their housing clustered around lakes or stormwater retention ponds, and therefore the 1,800 is not really valid as much as we look at what's happening with our present PDs, which is what apparently the public is asking for. Proportionately, a larger percentage of impervious to pervious areas will be in residential areas, primarily because of wider paved streets, mid-block alleys, and sidewalks as specified in the section called Development Procedures. For instance, number 10 is in defining mixed uses includes single-family residential accessory dwellings and multiple residential and others. But my point is part of what's known as mixed uses. And in item 14, it requires 7-foot sidewalks in 50% of the mixed-use areas. And number 15, in permitting on-street parking in mixed-use areas, will require normal, at least 24-foot streets to be at least 18 to 20 feet wider in order to handle that on-street parking. And I'm thinking of on-street parking does not really, to me, create a neighborhood as much as there's a barrier there of all those cars lined up on the street. And item 16 is somewhat a contradiction of item 15, which allowed on-street parking. And item 16 permits off-street parking only at the rear of buildings in mixed-use areas. That is not only in residential areas, but also in commerce and others. Also included is a concept I certainly support, and that is residential above the businesses in the business area. But early in my life, I lived on the third-floor apartment of a very popular hardware store on the first floor. And there was limited parking on the street. There was limiting parking in the back. In fact, I couldn't even park my vehicle there until after the store closed, and then I'd move it from someplace on there. So my point is, the restrictions on parking are such that I'm not sure just exactly how this will work out, but maybe that's one of the details that Stan wanted to refer to. The requirement is overly inclusive that 70% of the open space must be along project boundaries. For instance, at least 50% of the project area must be preserved as open space, of which not more than 25% may be located in a remote area called a sending area. Using the 70% requirement for boundary screening would require 70% times the 50% of total open space, which equates to 35% of the open space to be used as screening, but only 25% may be available when a maximum of 25 is involved in the sending area. So there's some mathematics here that to me don't add up. A better requirement would be to specify a minimum width of perimeter green belt rather than so much as 70% of the green space. Areas which I think are too vague, it comes about, the comment was this morning about, I think we need a definition. For instance, what is meant on single family low density, single family medium density, multiple family medium density? What are the density numbers? How will we know, or how will even a planner know what is meant by low family density, single family density, or so forth? I feel these need to be described with either numbers of 0.05 or 0.5 to 1.5 or 3 to 6 or whatever it is. It doesn't exactly tie it down, nail it down, but it gives someone a concept of what that would be. And then, of course, I find town center mentioned in there, and I don't really know what a town center is. I don't know if that's a plot of land. I don't know if it's a group of buildings. I don't know whether it's band shells or whatnot. So I do think a section in there on definitions would be good. Under town center, there's a statement made at the top of the page, and I don't know what page it is if I got to put it in there, that the floor ratio of town center areas designated as shopping and working areas shall be between 0.23 and 0.40. I don't know what that ratio is, because the ratio is something to something, and I know we're talking about a town center, but I don't know what it's compared to. And everything else we have in the proposed ordinances and percentages, and I suggest we change that rate to a percentage of something or another. And then, of course, I don't know whether the existing regulations pertaining to lot sizes, setbacks, and other land regulations apply to the new town concept. But I'm particularly concerned with one other, and I didn't know how to write it up. And that's in the regulation on page 5 in the lower paragraph. And specifically, it's talking about wanting the new town developed with a mixture of residential, shopping, working, recreational, and open space. And the last sentence reads, no more than 50% of the town's residential use may be developed until at least 25% of the proposed commercial, personal services, and industrial uses are developed. Now that sounds like a very innocent statement, but I think it's a very critical statement. For instance, 50% of the residential area is limited to between 15 and 35%. So 50% of the maximum of 35 would be 17.5. And then, of course, 25% of the commercial and so forth. I could not find in here specifically how much was allocated or allowed for the commercial, the services, and so forth. But going back, knowing that 50% of the project must be an open space, wherever that may be, and 35% can be, between 15 and 35, can be in residential, and with 5%, at least 5% for public buildings. So 35 and 5 is 40, take away, and the 50 is 90, so therefore, the only allocation for the commercial and so forth is 10. And if we limit that, in other words, if we don't have at least 25% of that, then we no longer can carry on and could build even more buildings. So 25% of 10 is 2.5%. 50% of the residential is 17.5 or 20. In other words, the developer could only use or anticipate receiving 20% of the whole project versus the 45 which he had planned for, the 35 plus the 10. So he had bought this land, he's laid out his infrastructure, he's set aside 50 acres aside to be maintained, but he only can receive 20 rather than 45, which is 44% of his investment, until he can then either develop more or get the business in there. I feel that that's overly restrictive. If we work on the lower end of 15%, it's even worse than that. But my point is, here we are anticipating all these advantages of a new town. We're trying to get someone in there, and yet who's going to run the chance of having their wrist slapped and have to stop construction simply because the businesses are not being developed? Is it the developer's loss because he can't get them to come in there? I think we can have a better explanation of that from what's happened out at Point West. They were set up to have businesses, and the businesses didn't come. So my point is, I just don't think if government is right to stop that project. I like the idea that it all develops together, but I just think that statement is an innocent statement that needs to be reworked or reviewed. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Anyone else have any comments? Mr. Paladin? Could be next one to come up here.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I'm Joseph Paladin. I'm the Chairman of the Growth Awareness Committee. I'm also a member of the Conservation and Rural Lands Committee. I passed out a paper to y'all earlier on a brief statement that Dr. Cox and some of the other committee members and myself put together that I'd like to read to y'all, and then I'd like to make a brief statement. Conservation and Rural Lands Committee. Who are we? We began as a GAC spinoff. We have broad stakeholders and professional representation. Our members include environmental organizations, ag landowners,
citrus growers, packers, developers, engineers, scientists, planners, and attorneys. Our overall purpose, to protect the county's valuable natural resources first, before any kind of development happens on rural lands. To enable future land use decisions to be based on the best available scientific information. Our objective, to assess rural lands for agriculture, conservation, and planning purposes using GIS tools. To share information and assist decision makers preserve the values of rural lands. Our work, first we hired Ryan Morrell, a GIS expert, to work with us. We have been developing a GIS database of rural land attributes that can be used to analyze future land use possibilities. We produce maps, charts, and other information that we want to share with you. Our next steps, we look forward to sharing our information with county staff, officials, and citizens. We plan a series of meetings starting as soon as possible. We're ready, and we hope our work can help provide a foundation for sound decisions about the future growth of the county. In summary, generally, we really don't think that this matters whether or not you're going to do ranchettes, you're going to do new towns, villages, 20-acre developments, whatever you're going to do. We're saying identify the land use first, identify the lands that are most valuable for conservation first, identify the lands that are most applicable to be used for agriculture or citrus or whatever other kind of agriculture use we can summarize. Identify the aquifer areas that would be becoming in danger if we develop too close to them. Take all that information that we've spent the last year or so putting together, and we've met with staff over a year ago to start this organization, and let us present it to you before you make any decisions where you're going to develop or how you're going to develop. So we just wanted to make that statement to tell you that we are available, and we want to present that to you at a later date. We have a nice PowerPoint presentation and a slide presentation, but we're not going to do it today because I don't think it's applicable. But we will do it at an early date.
You'll have another opportunity.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Gentleman over there.
My name is Peter O'Brien. I'm a native Floridian. Been a resident of Indian River County since about 1984. I have a little experience in new town concepts. For 2 years, I was the operations manager for a pest control company for the town of Celebration in Kissimmee, Florida. It's one of the very first new town concepts ever developed. Celebration had a lot of good things. It had clustered housing. It had unique traffic designs where the alleyways were behind the homes. That's where your driveway and entrance was the back alley, so it kept cars and minimized the street impacts. They had quite a bit of open space, both as residential open or recreational open space, and also as preserved wetlands and such. So it succeeded in all those categories. Did it reduce traffic in the town and in outlying areas? No. It became a major destination. A lot of people, such as myself, that did not live there, I drove there to go to the restaurants and use their facilities. A lot of the people that lived there got tired of eating at the same restaurant every night, so they drove out of the town to go to other places. So there was tremendous amount of traffic created. Matter of fact, 417, the Highway 417, had to put in a separate expressway entrance to dump right into Celebration to handle the traffic. So it did not reduce traffic. And it was not affordable. The houses there were upscale, higher income people. The folks that worked in the restaurants, the little deli restaurant, the Starbucks, et cetera, could not afford to live there. And even if they could afford to buy a house there, they could not afford to pay the property maintenance fees that went into the upkeep of that kind of a development. So I speak from experience. This was in 1999 and 2000. The overall concept of a new town, I think it's great on paper, but as we saw here and what I foresee here in this county, if we increase the densities and put a lot more people out in that part of town, it will have a major impact on our roads, our infrastructure, and our resources here in town. This county and others have battled for years to try to get sand pumping on the beaches. And every year they trotted out surveys that say, the beach is the only reason people come here. It's the beach, the beach, the beach, the beach. And if we think we're going to put 74,000 units out west of town and say, these folks are never going to drive to the beach, That's wrong, okay? They're going to come to the beach, they're going to come to the river, they're going to own a boat they can trailer to put on the river, they're going to need to go to the county courthouse, this administration building, our libraries, Dodgertown, McKee Botanical Gardens. I can go on forever with some of the resources that those folks are going to want to enjoy and use, and traffic will be created going back and forth. The care of these people, doctors, medical, things like that. I know the concept is in a new town you can walk to work, so you're going to have a doctor in there, a dentist, a CPA, a lawyer. But, you know, I went in the phone book and there's over 70 specialists for medical care. Now, I don't see 70 doctors setting up residence in one of these new towns. These people are going to have to get in their car and drive to go see all these specialists. Okay, there's just not enough people there to justify 70 doctors. Attorneys, 35 specialists, okay? These people are going to be getting in their car, driving, impacting our roads and infrastructure. So I think the idea of a new town is good on paper, but if we have to dramatically increase densities to make it work, it's going to have a huge impact on our county and on our quality of life, and I would be extremely opposed to any increases in the densities. I haven't had a chance to really crunch all the numbers, and Stan and Bob, you can correct me if I'm right, but the number is about 5,000 units to make one feasible. Is that correct? Okay. Under the current density, and I'm not talking about the recent one-to-one density that is under the Newtown ordinances, but the non-Newtown ordinances, which is 1 to 5, 1 to 10, and 1 to 20, there's that just under 17,000 units available. The proposal is for only 4 new town developments, 2 in Ag 1 and 2 in Ag 2. So that's about 20,000 units. We already have existing density for about 3.5 of those. Okay, we have 17,000 units. So I think we can put in 4 of these new towns with the existing density without having to increase the density. Now, what I would propose is eliminate the 25% restriction and allow the developer to go as far as he needs in these ag areas to get his 5,000 units. And I think this will do a couple things. One is, by maintaining a smaller number of units, the value per unit will go up, so that the landowner will still get a fair value for selling his development rights. By increasing the number of units, the price will probably go down. It's a supply and demand thing. The fewer there are, the higher the price. So the landowner will benefit because he will still be able to sell and make a profit or whatever he needs to do to keep it in ag. Under the current proposal, there's roughly alternative 1 or alternative 2, there'd be 33,400 potential units. But my concern is if we only allow the transfer of 25% in the new town, that still leaves a lot of acreage at a higher density that has not been protected by the permanent transfer development rights. And Mr. Bowling mentioned a future commission could change that, and that's my big fear, that a future commission come in here and say, well, you know what, all these other lands that they haven't sold this development right, we're going to change the zoning to 5 units per acre, and we're going to put in another cluster and things like that. To me, the only way this works is if we use this to go ahead and use up all of the existing density units so that all that land is permanently protected and preserved from any future commission. And by just maintaining the existing density, using those to build the 3 or 4 new townhomes, that once all those density units have been sold, that all that land is now permanently protected. And I think that would be a much better way to go. I think the man who had the point here, that Point West, where the businesses haven't come in, you know, I think that's the point exactly, is that the new town concept is supposed to be self-sufficient. And if we don't say, okay, you can't build 100% residential before the businesses go in, all those people are going to be traveling to get to their businesses. I agree with what you have proposed, that there should be some type of concurrency between the businesses and commercial nodes, along with the residential. I don't think we should go 100% residential first before we put those businesses in there. I was very pleased to see the lower income and affordable housing and workforce housing put in there. I'd like to see a higher percentage, actually. My only concern there is the people may be able to buy it, but due to the higher association or maintenance costs in those type of developments, will they be able to afford to still live there once they've bought it? And I think we need to look at that as part of the plan as well. I favor leaving the current densities the way they are. I think if people want to live in a 20-acre ranchette type style, I think that's great. Looking way down the road, we have a choice between low-density sprawl or high-density sprawl. And I think we need to take care of that. We don't let things slip and we end up with high-density sprawl. Mr. Davis, I understand your concerns. You get a lot of complaints from the Fellsmere about, dirt roads. And when I moved to Vero Beach, I lived on a dirt road, so I would have complained too. But I think part of that is a perception. People moved out to Fellsmere, I think, thinking they were living in a city, and maybe they expected city services, and when they didn't get it, naturally they want to complain. I would make the argument that someone that is going out to buying a 20-acre ranchette west of town probably isn't expecting city services, and it's going to be more of a self-sufficient type personality to live out there, maybe more of a loner, not the person who's going to complain just because his access is a dirt road.
You bring up some interesting point, though, that I'd like to ask of staff. Now, in the new town concept, speaking, kind of dovetailing on what Mr. Bryan had mentioned, there's been some discussion about some developments putting in and bonding the infrastructure and the improvements. Heritage Park was one of them, and that's in the city of Vero Beach. However, I could see how that would cut, and I'm not sure if Celebration has done that, but trying to keep the homeowners association dues or something in check so that if somebody does have an affordable place to live based on price, do they have an affordable place to live based on a monthly association fee, would be something that I'd like to see in the policy.
Okay. Mr. O'Brien,
I'm sorry.
Are you finished with your presentation?
Yes, I am. I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Christopher, I think he had a comment he wanted to make.
I'd like to ask
Go ahead.
Bob a question. Mike, George is coming up. Come ahead.
Come on up, George.
Bob, I'm just sitting here thinking, we looked at Windsor, but it seems like when we approved Grand Harbor years ago, they were going to have shops and restaurants and stuff along the waterfront down there. It's going to be somewhat self-contained, and it's never materialized.
You're correct. The marina area was zoned commercial. I think it still is zoned commercial, but the PD allows residential there, and the original plan was for mixed use. They do still have commercial area out along US 1, and they have some along Indian River Boulevard that they will be developing. But what we've seen in the last few years is residential is what's hot. We are trying to maintain, this is within the urban service area, we're trying to maintain commercial that we have. Developers are coming in, well-located commercial areas, like right on State Road 60 at 95, developers want to change it to residential. So what we're seeing is what's selling now is residential, and developers, I apologize to Mr. Paladin, but they're usually really narrowly focused and looking at the immediate benefit. They're not looking at longer term. So, our objective, one of our charges is to try to look at the long term and make sure there's an adequate mix of use, and that's one of the reasons I think Grand Harbor's focus most of us.
And he follows your lead, Joe.
Mr. Christopher and Mr. Bass, I believe.
We have a joint statement we'd like to present to the commission. By way of background, Jeff and I had breakfast yesterday morning. A mutual friend arranged it. We really didn't know each other. We had seen each other at public hearings on opposite sides of the debate. And the friend got us together saying that he thought there was common ground. And first thing Jeff said was that he found this proposal before you was not economically workable and had a lot of problems. And we had common ground since I said I found it troublesome because there were a lot of aspects that really weren't flushed out that had to be flushed out. We then talked for about an hour and found common ground, found some disagreement, which we discussed frankly. But then there was enough common ground that we said, well, what should we do? And I went back, I talked to a couple of the leaders of the IRNA, and I talked to some other people outside the IRNA who were concerned in development matters. I think Jeff consulted some of the Citrus League colleagues of his and perhaps others. And by 5 o'clock, we had this statement, which I'd like to read. And that is, if you encourage us, we will form a committee under the following very preliminary broad outlines. The committee would be limited in number to a workable number, which we think would be about 10, composed 50% of landowners and agricultural interests and 50% of persons representing diverse interests in the community. The group would meet in public, invite views of other interested parties, but we would hope would not be subject to sunshine law. The charge of the committee would be to develop a master plan for the development of the area outside the urban service line under 3 general operating principles. 1, the plan would meet the best interests of the Indian River community. 2, the plan would be economically viable to the landowners. And 3, the plan's implementation would be dependent on the projected population growth and the extent to which such growth can be accommodated within the USL, the urban service line. The committee would hire a nationally recognized planner to develop the master plan and to facilitate the committee's work. We contemplate asking the county to fund the cost of the consultant. Our attention is...
Okay.
Y'all didn't want to, you didn't want to fund that, George?
Well, very frankly, Jeff offered his group to finance it.
Amen.
No, I didn't say amen, and I don't think it is amen. I think there's an issue of credibility, and I think if we are to do this, we need credibility, and that should be a consultant that's independently funded.
Why don't we pick
Jeff,
it?
I think, agrees.
Why doesn't the county pick it and you pay for it?
Okay, you got it. Our attention is, I just got 2 more sentences. Our attention is, after further meetings between us and others, to request county commission endorsement of this proposal. We're not asking for it now. It's got to be fleshed out more. In the meantime, we request the county commission table further consideration of the draft revised Newtown policies that are before you. Jeff, you have anything?
I think George covered it very well. I think in my view, and George as well, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I view this more as a land management plan or endeavor, not a growth management plan or endeavor. Growth is a component of it because growth funds it. Growth funds the green spaces. So growth is a component of it, just like green space is a component of the plan. But it's a land management plan. That's our vision. I think that ultimate success depends on the people that are on this committee. So people that are on this committee that have a land management in their idea and their understanding of how this should work, I think those are good committee members. If it's a committee member that wants to stop growth in the name of green space, that's not a good person. If it's a person that wants to pave over the western lands in the name of progress, that's not a good committee member. But I think we've got a unique opportunity. You've got 2 guys here on the opposite ends of the spectrum that are willing, and we've gotten pretty close here. So we've got a good opportunity here, and there's not a lot of windows like this.
Thank you, gentlemen. Any questions? While we're talking, go ahead, George.
George, I hadn't I saw, I had understood what you were talking about. The one thing that is probably built into the land management in light of the fact that the Conservation Rural Lands Group was talking about it, and I think maybe we look at maximizing the protection of natural resources. Maybe we consider that a given, but I didn't see it on your list.
Well, there's a lot of things not on this list, George, and this is strictly preliminary. I would easily get that to meet the best interests of the Indian River community. Others that I've talked to have raised that right off the bat, and that's what the committee has to flush out. There's no question that's important.
What are you specifically looking for from this board today?
Encouragement that you think that, gee, this might make sense, and you'd like to hear it flushed out, and at the same time table.
You can't take any action at the workshop. You can take the proposal if you want to bring it back at a later date. If it wants to be on a commission agenda where they can take action, it
we
can
would
be done
propose
then,
to come back in
Mr.
2 or 3
Chairman.
weeks.
I think this whole episode here today is for fleshing out the whole idea, getting input from the staff and from y'all and from us.
Mr. Chairman. Bob, the significance of the window that we have, just from the, and just tell me a little bit more about the significance of the window that we have open with the DCA.
Actually, it's a pretty tight window, but let me start by saying staff doesn't have any problem in putting this off until the July window or next January.
Okay.
I think if you're talking about a major consultant study with a national consultant, it's going to take a while. Again, if the county selects, it's the RFP process. It's going to take a few months to select, and it's probably going to be an 8 or 9 months project. So it would probably be next January. Doing something in this window, we had been planning on taking the other amendments to the P&Z on March 23rd, and they have to go generally as a group. So we're real tight. So we would, if there's a consensus on that, we'd just as soon stop work on the staff report and the policy and let the project as was identified proceed.
You know, this is one of the most significant things I think is going to happen in this decade. And I can't see trying to meet a 6-month window if there's an opportunity to really take an in-depth look at this and get a broader spectrum, and if it takes another 6 months or another year, and as I said earlier, we got lots of space to continue with growth within the urban service area. So I'd be in favor of that.
And let me just point out one other thing. Martin County right now is in the midst of doing a Western lands study with a national consultant. So this would be comparable to what they're doing down there.
And it cost about $400,000, we staff thinks. I wasn't joking when I said if they would pay for it, we would pick it and they could pay for it. They could be involved in the committee.
Mr. Bear, we have it the other way. We'll pick it.
I don't think that's proper at all. But you're the one that said that he might pay for it, and I just was going along with that, and I don't think that would be a good idea. I think that it's...
You can approve it, but one of the things we've talked about, I think we would like to...
Didn't I hear you offer to pay for it?
Subject to your approval, the consultant. And if you don't choose to, if the commission doesn't choose to pay for it, we'll regroup on the matter.
I don't really think off the top of my head, just, thinking about this, think we can use taxpayers' money and not have any input and not have any oversight in this and turn it all over to a committee that we don't even choose. That's just, we've never operated like that.
We'll bring the person to you to choose.
Well,
Okay.
Did I misunderstand you, George? You said initially that they were willing to use private funds to pay for it. Did I misunderstand that? Because we would pick it, because I heard that clear as day from you.
I said that the Citrus League offered to put up, well, Jeff said, I don't know if the Citrus League backed him.
Ask the buck.
Jeff said they would put up the money. I don't believe that should happen that way, that a consultant, we have diverse views. We're going to have to work very hard to reach the agreement and develop the plan, and that consultant needs credibility. But this is something that's got to be talked through some more.
Okay, thank you, George. Thank you. Mr. Bernique, I see you in the audience. Did you want to present your letter here?
No, sir. I think we're very supportive of the
All right. Thank you. All right. Yes, sir. Mr. Higgs.
I'm John Higgs, 1145 Wax Myrtle Way. I would like to speak to the proposal just put before the board, but before doing that, I think a minute or two of background would be useful. Mr. Baird and Mr. Bowling and Mr. Keating were kind enough to permit me and a few other people to spend an entire morning with them last Friday to go over the Newtown proposal. They made it very clear it was a very rough proposal and needed lots of work. We had about 20 or 30 comments, and I believe they thought that all of them pointed out matters that needed lots of work. They may disagree with me on that, but I don't think so. It was a courteous and useful meeting, and I don't believe that this proposal is anywhere close to being able to work on. I won't spend 2 hours going over the various points, but just one thing. If a new town is established out there and it incorporates and it starts to annex, what's happened? There are problems with this proposal that there are many problems with this proposal which are as fundamental as that, including the part on low-cost housing, which I would be glad to answer questions on. What is in there doesn't work at all. And actually, it would be the long-term bad interest of the county. I'll be glad to discuss that if people want to. But the reason I'm here is I think this is a worthwhile proposal that has just been given to the board. There's a lot of land out there, and it's going to be there as longer than any of us in this room live. And there are a lot of people who strongly don't want that to look like west of Miami or west of Boca. And on the other hand, there are people that have land out there. They want to get fair economic return for what they own and what they, in many cases, have owned for generations. And the very nature of a political board such as this dealing with those interests is difficult. Of course it is. And I would think it would be a gift to the elected officials to have a group of responsible people who clearly have an interest in the matter, to give them some time to work on it, because the Newtown proposal you have now isn't ready. Mm-hmm. And even if it were ready, I can assure you, I studied new towns when I was an undergraduate at college. It was on the agenda of colleges in the 50s. And I think it's generally understood there has never been a successful new town. It doesn't mean that the concept doesn't have attraction. And you could argue about the details, but my position can clearly be supported. It's a concept that we don't have to rush into, and we have the time. There's a lot of land out there. It's going to be there for a while, and the people who are principally interested in seeing that it be developed properly are offering you an opportunity to get some advice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Higgs. It's 90 minutes since we started the meeting, and we're required to take a break, 90 minutes for the closed caption person. So we'll be back in 10 minutes, and Dr. Baker, you can be first.
Don't ever agree with you.
I'll tell you what.
Obviously, we ain't ready for this.
I'd like to call the meeting back to order, please.
I'd like to see you up here.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Dr. Richard Baker. Dr. Baker.
Thank you. Representing Pelican Island Audubon Society, and I have a little...
No PowerPoints, please.
Little PowerPoint.
A little one?
Little one, very short. And I think it summarized, there's been some really good points brought up today in the discussion of this issue. And I just wanted to point out a little bit that I think and these are facts I got from Mr. Keating. Our current population, I think, is around 128,000. Next slide, Stan. And Mr. Keating actually indicates that in the year 2030, the potential population will be 2008, which is a sizable increase of about 79,000, almost 80,000 people. For those of you who are interested in the urban service area, I showed it here in gray, and quite a bit of the ag land is within the I-95, if you look at the diagram there. Next slide indicates within the urban service area the amount of units that are available. About 117,000, almost 118,000 units are available. Next slide, please. And if you multiply that by 2.2, which is sort of the average number of people per unit, you come to 259, almost 260 people that can fit into that area. Next slide, please. So you have the space available of 260,000, and Mr. Keating says he's expecting in 2030 a population of 2008. We actually have about 50,000 people left over that we could accommodate. Next slide, please. And Mr. Peter O'Brien brought up the issue of the urban service area. And of course, we have Ag 1 part of it is within east of I-95, and we have a little bit around Fellsmere units, and they can be developed 1 to 5. And of course, Ag 2 be developed in the green is 1 to 10, and then way out there has been pointed out Ag 3 1 to 20. Next slide, please. If you add all that together and then the units, and Peter O'Brien mentioned almost 17,000, it actually is 16,828 units. And if you multiply that by 2, the next slide, you come to about 35, almost 36,000 people. Under today's living conditions, you can accommodate 36,000. Next slide, please. So if you look at the overall picture, you combine what's available inside the urban service area and you combine what's outside the urban service area, and you come to 294,000 units, population. And so then the estimated by Mr. Keating was 208,000. That gives a difference of about 86,000 spaces available. Next slide. So that's actually, Mr. Keating's is pretty low, and it allows for a 42% error in development of our county. And if you would take that and probably stretch it out, 86,000 would probably be good maybe almost for 50 years, depending on what's happening here. If we do nothing, if we don't do any changes at all, we probably have enough space for up for another 50 years. So we don't need to be in a hurry to settle this today. Next slide, please. However, if you must have a new town, perhaps a Barquette bill, and I'm not saying this for slamming Bruce, because actually his sister, Rosemary, is quite a Chief Justice of the Florida Supreme Court, and I think would be an honor to name something after her. But if you do want to have this town, then I want to consider the following. Next slide. I think commissioners, staff, and planning and zoning need a broad range of tools and techniques to create, and we've mentioned the GIS was mentioned here today. I think that's essential that you do that. We want to protect the best ag land that was mentioned today, the best water resources, and of course the hammocks and the specimen trees and so forth. The next slide, please. Important, I think, is that you do a long-term analysis. And this is what, if you've all read this, I hope, this sustainable Treasure Coast, put on by the Committee for the Stream, and Commissioner Sander Bowden was a member of that. But one of the things is that you should do is compare a new town cost versus filling in the units already within the urban service area for the education, social, economy, and natural environment. Next slide, please. Now, some landlords appear to be involved in this already, but actually the Sustainable Treasure Coast feels that you have to get all people to buy in this. In the long-term vision, it includes the natural, the built communities, the social system, education, and the economy. And all need to be included in the planning process. And I think you mentioned here we need people from diverse interests and backgrounds. Next slide, please. And of course, leaders, governments, and all sectors of the community must collaborate. And this does kind of go against the visioning process that you had, which you proposed so far, is that, there was a consensus that we should have no villages outside the urban service area, but that you should consider having a village or new town within the urban service area. Next slide, please. And you need vibrant centers and redevelopment in urban areas to contribute to sustainability. And I think before you get too involved in new villages, you need to think about what the city of Vero Beach needs, Gifford needs, Wabasso, Fellsmere, and Sebastian. What are their needs? And they're expensive needs too, and we need to address those. Next slide. And I think one of the important things is that we think about our schools, and we should not just think about the first grade to the 12th grade, but living here is a lifelong experience, and people are utilizing a lot of facilities, the Center for the Arts, various after-school activities, evenings, and you need to be able to provide that for everybody in the counter. And I know George is thinking about, and Mr. Bass are thinking putting a committee together, but I think a teacher and educator need to be considered. Next slide. These are all recommendations by the sustainability of the Treasure Coast. We need to think about our health service, and Peter O'Brien brought up about the specialists and doctors and things. I think you need to bring in Jean Klein from the County Health Department. She did a marvelous job in the Governor's Committee, and I think she would be important. Next slide. And we also have the programs, the arts, preserve and communicate the unique heritage of the region, respond to culturally diverse and changing populations. We should have an expert from the Cultural Council or a theater or the Art Museum. I mean, these are all part of our social activities, our fiber of our social activities. Next slide, please. We need a regional strategy for economic development, promoting economic diversity, prosperity, and sustainability, and we need a member then of the Florida Research Coast Economic Development Coalition. Next slide. In summary, this is a big deal, planning a village, and it needs to be done right. We need a diverse committee to plan with the help with the facilitator. They mentioned a consultant, and maybe that's more expensive, but when we were doing the Governor's and Senator Pruitt's year-and-a-half program, we had some wonderful facilitators, and I would think that they'd be a little bit less expensive than a consultant. And maybe that's what you need, because there is a lot of diverse of opinion. We need an anchor or a college or an industry somehow to support that. I would think this town's got to be big enough to support a Walmart. If you're talking about diverse people, a lot of people shop at Walmart. And I do. A lot of people say, oh, I don't go to Walmart. The same thing and say, I don't watch television. But everybody watches television. Most people go to Walmart. But we need something like that. The example of Windsor, I don't think, was such a great one for a village. There's not even a Publix on the Barrier Island, as far as I know. They all have to come across that bridge. And so you need... Maybe
it is, we just don't know it, though.
It's coming next year.
Yeah.
Isn't it coming next year?
They have a little grocery store there, I was
Bobby's?
told. No, at Windsor.
Bobby's.
Bobby's.
What kind of groceries you drink? I eat.
So in a village, I think if you're going to have a village, you need someplace where, well, not all these people are going to be coming into the Sebastian Walmart or the Vero Beach Walmart. Otherwise, these transportation issues are just going to be not too functional. The next slide, please. I'm almost done. Members of this committee, I mean, you heard one committee being proposed. I think a representative from the different governments in the city are important. One from the county commission, planning and zoning, and then the towns. I think you need the major experts in ag, citrus, cattle, organic farming, and horticulture. I've mentioned before, you should have somebody from the school representing the superintendent. And IRC college is really an important aspect of our community, and I think a representative from there should be there. A health representative, a social worker, affordable housing expert. Next slide, please. This is a little bit bigger than a small committee maybe, but some of these people I think should be considered, at least in a small subcommittees anyway. You need to get input. You need this input. For this whole town to work, you're going to have to get a lot of input. A realtor, a developer, a chamber of commerce, the cultural council representative, the Indian River Neighborhood Association, environmental scientists, water expert, transportation expert, and probably the press journal. There's no point having the paper against you. Next slide.
No point having them with you either, though.
And the Concerned Citizens Group, and, everybody.
What's going on there? Anyway, I don't think there's any need to hurry, and we should do it right. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Baker. I think the next speaker is Chuck Meckling from Point West. Wants to correct some errors.
Thank you. Chuck Meckling, President of Point West. Seeing that we've been discussed a little bit today, I'd like to talk just a few minutes about what is actually taking place at Point West, because that helps to put things in perspective. We have right now, we've been approved for 1,150 units out there. We have 450 units developed, pipe in the ground, roads in place. Of that, we have approximately 375 actual residential units built. The active retirement center has the main campus built in their apartment buildings in that facility as well, which creates a component of having a small or a new town type concept. All the green belt is in, which in our case is the golf course that surrounds the community, and we have our great amount of our parks in, and by the end of the summer, the recreational facilities. We also will be planning in May to be turning in our plans for the town center element. And when we talk about the town center element, what we're planning in that area is a spot for a dentist, health club, restaurants, hair salon, nail salon, day spa, a drop-off center for dry cleaning, a general store, a coffee shop, and that we also are talking about a medical center that will be out there on this land. The concept that's in this packet, when they talk about a 50% with needing of residential and then needing to go into the actual commercial element, is a part that will be attained at Point West. And what we've done is plan to have a critical mass of residential there, because it doesn't make sense to do commercial if you don't have the people to come and use it. Again, the town center element being the first aspect with small box commercial, that would be the coffee shop, the hair salon, the nail salon, those sort of components that the critical mass of residential will have in the neighborhood. Our plan is that by the time that the commercial will be built, there will be about 600 residential units at that time, and that'll be just a little bit more than that 50% margin that's being discussed in these numbers. So I wanted to try and bring some facts to the table of what is going on at Point West. In the meantime, like any small town as it grows, there's been a lot of events that go on out there. We do the Screen on the Green, now that's in Heritage Park that's been built. We have numerous community events that are a co-op program with Indian River County, and it's the only community in the county that has a co-op program that people can come and for absolutely nothing enjoy themselves. I know some of the commissioners were there for Winterfest. We had fireworks, we had the skating rink, and just numerous things. That is part of the concept of being able to put these communities together to allow other components for the public use for the good of the county as a whole. So I do believe that the new town concept is a very valid situation. I think that, like Commissioner Wheeler said, it's a very critical thing. It's something to plan. It's something to take the time to have. But I think that it is something that is a end component that can really make good use of our lands and a vision that could be used for the people. And it would still retain the feel that I think we all appreciate here in Indian River County. And I think quite often that's what the discussion is, not wanting to lose the feel of our small town environment, but yet planning for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Meckling. Pete Spike, I think, had some comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My name is Pete Spike, and I'm here today speaking as the co-chairman of the Committee for Sustainable Treasure Coast Rural Lands Subcommittee. So that's the hat I'm wearing today. I'm a citrus grower as well, as you know. I think that what I wanted to do is bring up in front of the board that the report from the Committee for Sustainable Treasure Coast, which spent 2 years basically meeting and grappling with the same kind of issues that all of these people are debating here today, and attempted to gather their thoughts in a concise, distilled manner. The report from that exercise is due out in about 2 weeks. We're just a little bit shy of that, and that report was supposed to be out late December, early January. It's been delayed for one reason or another, but this is the preprint copy. It's pretty much there, and I talked to Jean Scott today, and she assured me that it's going to the printer like Monday or Tuesday. So however long it takes to get it printed and back, you'll get one. I do know that there is a strong feeling that the Sustainable Treasure Coast mission should not end with the issuance of the report. That there are specifically 2 things that are anticipated as being subsequent follow-up activities. Number one, there will be a group put together whose mission will be to go around and speak to county commissions, city commissions, citizen groups, that sort of thing, and talk about what's in the report. It's a long read, and not everybody's going to go through the whole thing. So we know that we're going to have to do a little bit of educational mission just to let people find out what's in it. The second thing is it's anticipated that an institute of some kind called Sustainable Treasure Coast will be formed and perhaps housed under one of the universities or community colleges in the area, and that the mission of that group will be to further the ideas that are expressed in CSTC. We don't know exactly what that's going to be like, but there is going to be some support, anticipated anyway, to help commissions or committees like they're talking about forming here today work through some of these issues. Think tank, resource, a place to get resources and that sort of thing. We're not, all of us that were on that group, and there were a number of people on my committee here today. Everybody raised their hand that came to one of the meetings. So come on, don't be bashful. So the ideas that are in here are not just one person's or a few people's ideas. There were many, many people involved. So, and Dr. Baker mentioned many of the ideas as well, which further indicates that he believes, as I do, that the things that are in this report should enter the decision-making process that you will be going through between now and the time you adopt your comp plan amendment. Specifically, as it speaks to rural lands, I wanted to make just a couple of comments. First of all, the way that I look at the new town component of your comp plan is that it's not a new town plan. It's a rural land preservation plan. That's the point of doing new towns. If you weren't trying to preserve rural lands, there would be no problem with just sprawling ranchettes out over the whole thing. But there's a number of negative consequences to chopping up the land in the ranchettes. And the report basically talks about ways to deal with those consequences. It basically says that if you don't want ranchettes and their negative consequences in terms of environmental impact and traffic and all this sort of thing, having one major benefit we understand of limiting population, if you don't want that land use pattern, three things have to happen. First of all, any agriculture that remains out there in that rural land has got to be profitable. If we're not making money in agriculture, we can't stay. So as much as you might like to have ag as part of your permanent open space, that profit piece of the puzzle has to be addressed, and there's ways to do that, and the report describes these ways, and basically it's by trying to connect some of the agriculture with the urban communities that spawn their preservation. Second one is you have to have a working transfer development rights program. There has to be a way to remove development rights from some of the land and transfer it to other parts of the land. And TDR programs are devilish things. We spend a lot of time on TDRs in the rural land program. They're very difficult to do, and the success rate is low. So it definitely will be important to think about your TDR program to make sure that it works. If it doesn't work, you don't get it. And the third one is that the combination of future agricultural revenue and the value of a TDR, a development right that a farmer is selling, has to be equal to or greater than the current land value. In other words, if he's not better off preserving the land by staying in agriculture and making a profit, selling his TDRs, then he's going to sell the land for ranchettes, and you won't be able to preserve your rural land. So I did want to bring up those 3 points as being really our committees, our rural land committees, bottom line statement, which is that if you want something different to occur, these 3 criteria have to be met. And the plan has to address those 3. Right now, the plan talks about numbers and density and all this sort of thing, but it really doesn't talk about rural land values and what it is you're trying to achieve in the land that you don't develop. So there's a whole nother piece of this puzzle that has to be addressed before you got a plan. And I think you can look to CSTC to support you directly and the citizens, as well as any committee that you appoint. That's about all I have to say. I'll answer any questions.
It's kind of, and I don't know, it almost seems to me that what we're trying to do now is a comp plan issue. And once we solidify our comp plan issue, then we go into the LDRs for what we put into our comp plan. With the issues that Mr. Spike mentioned, would we try to address those in the comp plan, or would we try to address those in the land development regulations of the new town?
I can answer that. Basically, what it amounts to is that when you start talking about rural land preservation, design becomes an important consideration. In other words, it's one thing, as you well know, to include your open space internal to the built environment, in which case you haven't preserved agriculture and you haven't improved the river and you haven't preserved any native habitat or restored native habitat in areas that have been impacted. It has to be outside. So to the extent that design features are going to be an important part of the outcome, it's important that those design features be addressed in the comp plan, because you don't want any goofing around with any of that stuff. It's got to be basic thing. Then your LDRs can actually get into the specifics about how you go about doing the design. But to the extent that design is important, design has to be addressed. It's not just numbers.
Bob, shaking his head.
Actually, I don't think that's the case. I think the comp plan is the general overall policy, and it has to be numbers oriented so that everyone knows what's going to occur and everyone's comfortable with it. We know the reason that there was concern with the new town policy last May is the numbers allowed too much population. The purpose of the comp plan policy is to allow this to meet some overall goals and objectives like rural lands, preservation, agricultural preservation, things like that. But we want to keep it not too prescriptive at that level. We still want to, you got to have the comp plan policy to have safeguards so this doesn't come under control, go out of control. You've got to set the overall parameters. The LDRs will get a little more specific, but remember, we're going to allow flexibility in the design because you have total control during the comp plan amendment process for the individual site and the PD. That's when we get into the actual design. To the extent we limit the design, to the extent we mandate things, to the extent we prescribe things, there's less flexibility. If we make sure that the comp plan policy will achieve what we want to give the developers the maximum amount of flexibility. And we do have TDR, transfer of development rights, built in here. We will never, ever have a transfer of development rights program that is like currency and where it's traded. I think what we will have with the limited number of new towns, no transfer of development rights into the urban service area, is individual deals or relationships between a developer and a landowner. That's another way that transfer of development rights can work without a big system where it's like currency and can be traded, and there are banks, and believe me, there are many TDR programs out there and almost none successful. But I disagree with Mr. Spike, again, with the comp plan policy being the safeguard and not real prescriptive.
Here's what I'm saying.
Any further? Gary, you have questions?
Yeah, Pete. When you talk about the three things you mentioned to make ag's got to be profitable, the land value's got to be higher than what it's worth for housing, et cetera, and to preserve ag. And we went through this 15 years ago, trying to figure out ways to preserve ag, green area, urban service line, low density, et cetera, everything we've got in our comp plan today. And now 15 years later, going back in and massaging that, and I understand the process, and re-looking at it. So now we can expand and develop more and use up some more ag, but protect some of it. And a lot of these are good ideas. Some of them I don't agree with. My question is what's to prevent another 15 years from now, if there's villages out there, and the ag business isn't profitable, and the value of the property is worth more, and even though we've maybe transferred the densities, I think history has shown that government can do just about anything it wants to do when it decides to do it. And I think even safeguards that we put in place aren't necessarily there permanently any more than they were 15 years ago, bringing us up to today. So, but ag's still going to be, the same questions are going to be asked 15 years from now, 20 years from now.
Let's see if I can break that down a little bit. Basically, the permanence or durability of the solution is something that we mentioned in the report as being essential. There can't be a loophole to wiggle out from whatever preservation that you do put into place. Once the deal is made, that's got to be the deal, and there can't be any way to come back and undo it. And that is a subject that I would assume that you and the committee are going to have to go through to figure out how to make that happen. There's definitely tools to make sure that that doesn't occur. Clearly, it's a concern. No question. And another good bottom line point. I don't disagree with Bob about numbers needing to be in the comp plan. But what I'm talking about, and specifically speaking to your profitability issue, and this is what we say, is that you don't have an option. If agriculture is going to be part of the open space, it's got to be profitable. And the stakeholders in that are not just the farmers. They're the people who are going to be enjoying the benefits of the open space, everybody that lives here. We all have a common goal to make sure that that open space isn't converted and isn't abandoned from some useful use. And my favorite example of that is real simple. Number one, right now, local communities are spending millions of dollars to drill deep wells and inject wastewater out of sight. In the meantime, I'm buying ammonium nitrate barged in from Louisiana, made out of natural gas at the current land prices. There's a double cost associated with that. I need nitrogen to grow citrus trees or energy source plants or whatever you want to grow, pasture for cattle or horses. So I have to buy it, you're paying to get rid of it. If we can put that relationship together so that the wastewater is provided to the people who can get benefit from it, my production costs go down, your operating costs go down, and at the end of the day, I become more competitive with my crops. And in order to do that, and this is where the design thing comes in order to do that, you can't specify that the wastewater is going to be used on a golf course or on parks inside. It's got to be sent to a farm. And the design part of the thing says the farm will be part of the town. And one of its jobs, one of its values, and this is what we talk about, will be a place to turn wastewater into a benefit. And it's that kind of connection that's possible that right now we're not taking advantage of. That if we do that, we can change the outcome for everybody. And that's probably the simplest way of...
Thank you.
Very well put. Okay, thank you. Doug, do you have your hand up?
Because I have so many growers here, and one of my budget members, George Hammond, is sitting to my left, who will kill me if I walk out without clarifying this issue. We don't have $400,000 in my budget. Sanders, one of my growers, Wesley, you are. I just make sure you understand that. We support the process. We appreciate your indulgence in this matter and hope you'll proceed. Thank you.
I see a hand up over here.
George will loan it to you.
Second
question is, how much do you have?
Whoops.
Commissioner Newber, or Chairman Newber, Commissioners, as a board member of the Chamber of Commerce, I'd like to read for the record a letter sent to the County Commission on February 28th by our Executive Director, Penny Chandler, regarding the new towns. Please accept this letter on behalf of the Chamber in regard to the Commission meeting on Public Workshop Friday, March 3rd, 2006 on the subject of new towns. Last year, when the Chamber provided input related to new towns, we said it was important to consider our county's commitment to the Committee for a Sustainable Treasure Coast and wait for the recommendations of that report. Their report has been in final form for 1 week. It addresses some of the concepts included in our comprehensive plan policies 1.34 and 1.35. We hope the county will not rush to make changes to the existing new town policies, but consider our local commitment to work as a region as we make significant land use choices for the future of Indian River County. The Chamber opposes urban sprawl. We support preserving and perhaps refining the new town concept, recognizing the public benefits associated with adequate infrastructure, natural habitat, agricultural, public assurance of open space and perpetuity. We believe that any refinement to the Indian River County Comprehensive Plan relative to new town concepts should be compatible with the recommendations in the Sustainable Treasure Coast report. Our Chamber leaders are eager to work with you, county staff, and other groups as our county moves forward to propose any revisions or enhancements to our new town policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir, in the middle.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Greg Burke. I'm here representing the Treasure Coast chapter of the American Institute of Architects as its president, also as a resident living at 455 29th Court Southwest. Like most of the previous speakers, I won't reiterate too much. We are in favor of doing the new town concept the right way. We think that there's still some more work that has to be done and some more thought put into it. As Doug said, he doesn't have $400,000. As Joe said, he doesn't have $400,000. But as Mr. Spike said, design is an important part of what you're doing. We as members of the American Institute of Architects are in agreement with that. We would strongly recommend that you use our services. Put an architect on that committee. I've seen 2 lists come up so far, no architects listed. We have no less than 3. I can name 3 members right now who have town planning experience. And pretty extensive, some of it in Santa Barbara, which I guess most of you probably know is one of the more picturesque places in the United States. So we respectfully request that you consider design as an important part. Also, I've brought a little leave behind. This is a publication put out by the AIA. We are very actively involved at the local, state, and national levels in new town development. This is called Livability 101, so it's a primer. Like most architectural things, there's a lot of visual images in here, but this really addresses everything that we want to talk about, and that's quality of life. So I'm going to leave this behind for you. If you feel inclined, please take a look at it, pass it on to staff if you like. I'm sure they'd find it very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Nancy, take this one, and Bob, why don't you come on this one? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nancy Offit. I just wanted to mention, many of us in the room have been following this concept throughout the Treasure Coast, St. Lucie County, Martin County. And on March 7th, St. Lucie County, which is further ahead, I'm not saying that they're doing it better, but chronologically, they've spent more time on this. They're having and on March the 7th, they're having a workshop on towns, villages, and countryside that perhaps some people may want to attend, just to get the benefit of some of their input and questions.
Thank you, Nancy. Yes, sir.
Commissioners, I'm Lex Crumhout, 4150 11th Place Southwest. I'm a citrus grower, an agriculturalist, and a landowner with a farm located right in the middle of Indian River County. I want to underscore to you the comments that Pete Spikes made. Those 3 factors are absolutely critical to this town's concept if it's to take place. If you don't maintain the viability of the green space or agricultural areas, you in effect create a liability for the remaining landowner. And nobody wants a liability. You have to be equitable, Sandra. You're absolutely right. So keep that in mind as you're looking at this. I'm almost wondering if we're not too late with our towns and village ideas here in Indian River County. I know of at least 3 major projects that are about to take place around the perimeters of Indian River County, one being a 7,000 home site, another one being a 5,000 home site, and then in the western part, there's a land transaction that's taking place there that I understand is going to be something like a Harmony in the future. So a lot's happening around us. I don't know if we can stop the concept of new towns, but I want to stress one thing. And Wesley, I think you made this recommendation, you or Mr. Wheeler. You came up with some good suggestions with respects to the Ag PUD and the Ag subdivision and trying to blend the best of both of those to try to accomplish a balance of preserving agricultural or open space and environmental sensitive spaces. I tried to do that with a development, and I ran into exactly what you're talking about with the clustering issue. It is a major problem in our existing LDRs, and I recommend that some more work be done on that to address that problem. The agricultural community is under extreme stress. If you don't believe me, your Ag Advisory Committee of this County Commission Board just met last week and received a report from Jack Hebb with the St. Lucie County Extension Service. If you have not read that report, I urge you to read that report. You will get some inkling out of that report as to how fast this transition is going to occur in our county. And believe me, it's going to be fast, because the economics of what we're doing now as farmers isn't working. And we're faced with making some major changes in our agricultural sector in this county. And what is the alternative crop going to be? We don't know, quite frankly, and as long as we don't know and there isn't an alternative crop, as landowners, we only have one choice to look at, and that is to develop. So I urge you to look at that report, heed to what Pete said, and consider what Wesley and Mr. Wheeler were saying in trying to deal with these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lex. Did I hear see more hands? D? After Bob.
Thanks. Well, I'll be very, very brief. For the record, Bob Swift. I'm speaking as a resident of the county, 6400 Glendale Road, and someone who's trying to develop a practice in sustainable development and sustainable operations. And when we define sustainability, we look at it on really all the elements that we've been talking about today: social equity, economic viability, and environmental protection. And I think if we keep those 3 factors in mind as we go forward, looking at how we develop a sustainable land management program for the western lands of the county, and I really like the way Mr. Bass characterized that, then I think all of these issues that have been talked about can get addressed within that context. I also wanted to say, for the record, when going back and reviewing, doing a little research on this, I was surprised to find that on the May 5th meeting minutes, when we talked about new towns and villages, that I was quoted as being in opposition to that. And I want to assure you that there's nothing further from the truth. There are a lot of details. There is, and as the saying goes, the Lord's in the details to make this kind of development program work. But we have a choice. We can either plan for our future and embrace that future, or we can sit back and react to it, in which case we'll be saying, gee, we really missed an opportunity. I think what Mr. Bass and Mr. Christopher laid out today is a great opportunity for the county. I hope you embrace it, and we'll certainly do everything we can to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Swift. B. Gardner.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this important issue. This morning I attended a workshop here at the same chambers on the 360 Senate bill, which basically related to growth management. Growth management relating to water, roads, and schools, concurrency. It was kind of mind-boggling, and here we are this afternoon doing basically the same thing with a little area outside the outside of our urban service area, some form of growth management or some form of development called new towns. I'm here to, Stan, if you wouldn't mind putting up that map you had. Thank you. This map is called the Future Land Use Map. And that's exactly what it states. It's telling us already what we're able to do in the future. The 1 acre ranch, the 5, 10, or 20 acre ranchettes, or 20 homes, you know, whatever it is, on the ranchettes. And that's a form of growth management that was put into effect a long time ago. And then all of a sudden we're being rushed into making decisions on changing all this. And I kind of look at this from the KISS method, let's keep it simple, stupid, you know. I just think we're rushing into something that we're not anywhere near ready to help out the dying citrus industry by a quick decision so that some people are going to be able to sell off their land and create a new town, and there's developers all over the country waiting to pounce on these few people that are ready to sell their land off and, you know, create a new town. We don't even know what we want in a new town. I just think we need to sit back, take a breath, talk it over for a year or two or whatever it takes. I don't like this business of being sort of, oh, we have to know right away. There's no hurry on this. We already have a map in place that tells us what we can do. We already have, if Ralph King's figures are correct, we have 50,000 homes in the pipeline right now. If you read the newspapers and you find out that the housing bubble is about to burst, we're liable to have 50,000 pieces of inventory that aren't going to sell. I don't think that's going to happen, but the bottom line is development is taking its force. It's happening, and it's going to happen at its own pace. So why should we rush things along, create all these LDRs and switch lands and do this and that and try to make it necessary or able for somebody to come in and develop another potential failure? You know, if you want to look at Celebration, I've been there. The place up there near Panama City, what's the name of that?
Seaside.
Seaside, I've been there. Point West, Grand Harbor, you name it. You know, what they call a new town or a planned development. I see these new towns as being basically planned developments outside of the urban service area. I think we need to slow down, take a breath, and not be rushed by anything. Keep the plan in place as it is. If the developers are interested in buying lands outside the urban service area, there's no reason why they couldn't buy the ranchettes as they are, the 5, 10, and 20s. And then you talk about the land on the far west part of our county, which is the 20-acre ranchettes, one unit per 20 acres. I mean, think about what's happening in Osceola County right up to that line. So, big deal. Somebody's going to want to encroach that and come into Indian River County. So maybe they want to do a new town at that end. We're already seeing the encroachment of a future new town that's coming in on St. Lucie. So if they want to come across our line, then they're going to want us to develop that to a new town. So as we're being encroached by all ends, if we keep things the way they are, we're still letting people develop, even though it's smaller density, less density. I think that we need to take a deep breath, let these committees get together, these consultants get together, and take 6 months, a year, or whatever. But to say that we have to make these decisions right now, within a month or 2 months, so we can be ready for the January deadline, I think we need to just sit back and take our time on this, because we have a lot of land still to be developed, including ag, inside the urban service area. So I'm highly in favor of taking a breath and letting the new towns sit still for a while. I hope that's a decision you all make. Thank you.
Thank you, Bee. I think that's what we're doing. You are taking our time and looking at all the aspects. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Ruth Myers. I'm Director of Resource Development for the Audubon Partnership for Sustainability. And what I want to say today is that I'm confused on some issues. And I participated in a lot of the Rural Land Subcommittee meetings. I listened. I tried to educate myself. What I learned there is that there are new towns that work. There are TDR programs that work. And my point in saying this right now is that I think there have been blanket statements that have been made that are at least arguable, if they're at least arguable. And I think that you have an opportunity with the committee that was proposed to have the kind of informative process that the CSTC program represented, and that we don't have to rely on expressions of personal opinion as fact. And in the CSTC report, I think probably the most valuable piece in terms, because it doesn't answer every question, it doesn't give you complete programs. But at the back in the section called Maintaining a Sustainable Region, there are overarching principles for how to do that, how to achieve that for your community. And I wanted to just read 3 of them. An informed public is effectively involved in regional solutions. And I'm finding myself being disinformed by this process today to some extent. Decisions take full account of the value of regional assets and the costs associated with alternative courses of action. Timely, reliable data and information and a set of sustainable indicators promote public understanding of regional challenges and assist public and private decision makers. I think that is probably the most valuable outcome of the CSTC report, although it gives great direction in other areas. And I hope that actually I should read another one. Leaders, governments, and all sectors of the community to collaborate. I think that there's a way to fund a decision-making process that represents everyone. It's important to have reliable information and not to just accept statements that are based on public personal opinion. I think that to do anything less is a disservice to the members of the public in this community. So I hope that you'll take advantage of every opportunity that's out there to support that process to the fullest extent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Myers. Do we have a choice?
Sure. Back by popular demand. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, it seems how the hour is drawing near. I just wanted to say, I wanted to ask a question, basically, or have some clarity. At the end of this workshop, which I realize is just a workshop, and of course there's nothing going to be voted on, basically, but if we don't adopt or bless Mr. Christopher and Mr. Bass's offer to form a committee, I'd like some clarity as to where we go from here. You know, what do we do next? What does staff do next?
I think we're about to that point where we start discussing that.
Yeah. So
Here,
as
that
all
means
get done,
that
I think we're going to bring it back to us and make our feelings known.
I'm ready when you are for that.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone from the audience? Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, fellows. Wesley?
Yeah, we had some really good input today. Mr. O'Brien, that has had the opportunity to see it firsthand. And I guess my feeling on it's this, is the last time we had an issue that was this, I could say, divisive or sensitive, it was probably the issue of the moratorium that we went through back on November 16th, 2004. Not that I remember. And at the time, we had the opportunity for two groups to stand up in front of us, totally different views, and say, give us some time, let's work this out and come back with a solution. And I believe that whenever I saw Mr. Bass and Mr. Christopher stand up and say they agree, I thought for a minute the planets were going to collide, and we were going to have some cataclysmic event. But I really believe that there can be some good that comes out of a discussion from people on both sides of the issue, because you truly have to have some buy-in to the plan that we eventually put together. And staff, you've done y'all have done a great job as far as starting the dialogue and putting in the direction. Dr. Baker has brought up some good ideas, but I think that quite possibly a committee of that size could be too cumbersome. I'd prefer to give you the opportunity to meet out of the sunshine, so I don't want it to be a sanctioned committee by this board. I think you get a lot more done by rolling up the sleeves and letting each other have it. I think it's very appropriate, though, for you to have a subcommittee of some kind, or have, and that's basically, from what I understand, how Joe put things together whenever he was leading the Growth Awareness Committee, as he had subcommittees break out, and they incorporated the people that perhaps Dr. Baker mentioned. I think that it's a good opportunity for us right now to draw on the resources of the Sustainable Treasure Coast information and to use their expertise. I don't believe we need to hire a $400,000 consultant, and truthfully, I wouldn't be in favor of that. I know that is maybe making Joe feel better over there. But as far as being able to say that I'm in favor of this plan, I can't say that I am. Can I say that I'm in favor of a new town? I can't say that I am. Am I in favor of ranchettes? From here to Osceola County, I can't say that I am. I've got a whole lot of questions that I need to have answered, and if we've got a committee that's willing to do a lot of work in conjunction with staff, I'd like to give them the opportunity to.
Anything else? Gary?
Well, I agree with Leslie 2 out of 3, but I didn't see a comparison here with the moratorium. I thought that was a lot more heated and a lot more separation. I was pleasantly surprised today, as a matter of fact, from the input that we got from both sides, and looking at this in depth from both sides. And I would like to see the committee come up, made up of the players, and however they would put a committee together. I think there's a lot of work that has to be done as to how it would be formed and who's going to be on it, and whether the commission is going to have input or whether you're going to work on that separately and then come back to staff and the commission with proposals, and tabling this and giving us time to approach it from that direction, because it's as I said earlier, it's probably one of the most important things that's going to happen in this decade for Indian River County, and that's the direction we're taking for new growth. And I don't see it as being something that we need to rush to a solution quickly, because we've got lots of space inside the urban service area. Our new town, as it's written now, I've been told by staff, would be difficult, if not impossible, to develop. So I don't think there's any threat. And even if more ranchettes are developed, they can still develop them even if we move forward on a new town under our current regulations. So I'm all for kind of slowing down a little bit, and let's take a really hard look at this. I think some of what Peter said made a lot of sense, and some of what B said made a lot of sense, and I just like to see us all take a good hard look at it and really look at it in depth. Dr. Baker's suggestions, a lot of people willing to give input, and I think the more input we get, the more thinking out of the box we get. And so I'd be in favor of seeing this committee come back and get formed and working on it, something like the Growth Awareness Committee.
Very good. Sandra?
I'm not opposed to committees at all. I am opposed to public taxpayers' money providing the consultant, and I've already made that statement. I think that it should be, a lot of things should be hammered out, including what we're talking about, rural lands and agricultural lands. And you have to tell the public exactly what is happening and not, put a shade on it. And by that I mean is citrus is and land that you have known for generations is not going to be there forever, and it's already not there. So if you're trying to protect something, if you're selling this as a protection of agriculture and this, that, and the other, let's just say who all is not going to farm anymore yesterday, much less tomorrow, next week. It's a whole different ballgame than it even was before the hurricanes. And many, many people will not be farming. Many packing houses won't be opening. That's just the long and short of it. And so when we're talking about green space, let's say what green space is. People think it's natural habitat or natural land. That's not what I'm hearing green space is. I'm hearing green space is the border around the new town, and it could be a golf course, a horse situation. That takes fertilizer, that takes a lot of maintenance. That's part of the development. That is the selling part of the development. That doesn't benefit the community as natural resources or maintaining the habitats or what we view as the rural area that we've known and enjoyed and loved and want to pass on. So once we get these committees going, and I think talking a lot of good minds are in this community, we really need to lay it out what we're talking about here and not sugarcoat it. And if you want natural habitat, we have to preserve natural habitat. If you want green space, you have to say that's not natural habitat. That is green grass that we grow and fertilize and water.
Or groves, yeah.
And how many groves? We need to really look at how many acres are going to be left within 5 years. We know what it is. And I think this is a long-term committee. It's not going to be a 3 to 4 month committee. I think it would be, if you're really going to be inclusive, probably a year, 9 months to a year.
Thanks, Sandra. Tom?
Well, this will be the first time I've had the opportunity to speak today because the other side has taken the whole afternoon.
Did you want to sit over on that side?
No. Now I can't hear on my left side.
Here I know, it's because you're running. You don't want to offend anybody.
Or say anything that offends anybody.
I stop now. By the way, pretty tie. And the only
pink elephants
fits perfect. The only thing you see, you're getting late, isn't it? I get to speak for another 2.5 hours because you've had the first 2.5. Now, if you all remember back last year when this became an issue and it was the citrus people lobbying us and saying that we need to keep this in. That was the whole idea of doing that, keeping it in. We didn't want to throw it out with bathwater. We did that because we knew we needed to massage it. I think a couple weeks ago when Commissioner Wheeler said, we don't need these workshops right now. This is a perfect reason why we had them today, to bring this information forward and begin to massage those things that I think we want. New towns, we all understand that the concept's there. St. Lucie County is looking at it. The biggest issue I have with villages and new towns is infill. How do we stop infill? And I think once you create this little metropolis, something's going to happen in years to come where it's going to meet ends meet. I think this was great today. I do believe that we need to take our time on this thing and do it right, and we have a lot of capable avenues out there with the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council with a lot of ears and eyes that have been going through this throughout the state of Florida. So I am glad we had this workshop today.
It's been very informative for me, and I think I hear a common thread going through us all that we're interested in this, but we want to know more about it. We want to do some more study. So I think I would recommend this committee, it was recommended, form away from us. You know, we don't want to be part of it. You want it to be out of the sunshine, so that's the way to do it. And, you know, we've heard from the citrus people, and the Chamber of Commerce said slow down, B said slow down, so I think that's a good idea. And I would recommend that almost everybody who spoke today would be good for the committee.
Yeah.
You know, we had the citrus people, the architects, and Mr. O'Brien, and people who are very interested who are here today. I think you've got to pick and choose your members here today, perhaps, and get together and make a recommendation. And we're not hurrying. I think we first heard about this maybe a year ago. Pete, maybe it was 2 years ago when you had that symposium down in Stewart, and I think I was just newly elected, or almost, which would have been 3 years ago when I first heard about this. Was it? So it's not brand new, and it's still not resolved today. So perhaps in another 3 or 4 years we get it resolved. But we do need more study, and I think unless there's any more comments, any comments from the public, any further P&Z people, anybody? I'm going to let George Christopher and Jeff Bass are going to head this committee.
And Bass is going to pay for it.
Could they give us, if they could give us, I think there'll be a common question of who will be on the committee, if they would give us just a list, because that may be a question that you get. Also, I think they'll be very effective, you know, meeting alone, and that's how we got things done. Some of the members criticize us for that, but I think people know it's a good way to go.
Yeah. We don't want all Indian River Neighborhood Association people, nor do we want all any other group, but just a cross-section of the community, if you will. And let us know who's on the committee, and maybe some of us can make some recommendations who we would like to see on the
I'd just assume stay as far away from as I can. Let them do.
I think.
Why have my opinion if they want to form their committee?
I also think that we need to have. I think Bob or Stan needs to go there so they can give them some, you know, some technical.
Yes, they should
guidance.
include one of these guys. Okay, I think the meeting is adjourned, and thank you all for coming. A very, very informative meeting.